They scrutinized her ID, questioned her legitimacy, and called security, all before realizing they were about to deny service to the one person who could end their careers in a heartbeat. The idea had been sitting in the back of her mind for months, a quiet thought at first, easy to push aside. But the more she reflected on it, the more it gnawed at her. Danielle Grayson built Grayson Trust from the ground up, her bank, her legacy. She wasn't just a CEO sitting in a glass office overlooking a skyline. She had spent years ensuring that her institution was different, accessible, built on fairness. But was it really? That was the question that kept her up at night. She had heard whispers before, concerns about how certain customers were treated at certain branches. Nothing blatant, nothing that would make headlines, just a feeling. Stories from friends, comments in passing from people she trusted. She had brushed them off at first. After all, her bank had strict policies on fair treatment, anti-discrimination, and customer service excellence. But policies were just words on a page. Real change came from actions, and Danielle needed proof. She needed to know, not as a CEO, not as a boss, but as a customer. So today, she was just another woman walking into a bank. No expensive blazer, no silk blouse, no designer heels, just a simple cardigan, jeans, and sneakers. She pulled into the parking lot of a Grayson Trust branch in Indianapolis, Indiana, a location she had personally greenlit just 3 years ago. She had shaken hands with the branch manager at the ribbon cutting, posed for pictures, and given a speech about trust being the foundation of good banking. Now, she was walking in as a nobody. The automatic doors slid open, and the crisp scent of freshly printed paper and industrial-strength air freshener filled the lobby. She glanced around. It was a slow afternoon. A few customers stood in line, a couple sat in the waiting area, and a teller at the far end was balancing a cash drawer. Danielle adjusted her bag on her shoulder and stepped up to the counter. A young teller, mid-20s. Pale complexion, dark hair pulled into a stiff ponytail. She glanced up at her. No greeting, no smile, just a quick once-over before shifting her attention back to the screen in front of her. Danielle cleared her throat. "Hi, I'd like to make a withdrawal." The teller didn't look up, just reached for a clipboard and slid it across the counter. "Fill this out." The form was standard. Name, account number, withdrawal amount. Nothing unusual. Danielle pulled a pen from her bag and filled in the details. $5,000. Not a huge sum, but enough to require an ID verification. She slid the clipboard back. That was when the shift happened. The teller's eyes flicked over the form, then to Danielle's ID. Her brows pulled together, lips pressing into a thin line. Something about the moment felt different. A slight tension in the air, a hesitation that hadn't been there a second ago. Danielle waited, gave her the benefit of the doubt. The teller glanced up again, this time actually looking at Danielle's face. Then she hesitated a beat too long, a moment of doubt, and in that split second Danielle knew it wasn't about the withdrawal. It wasn't about a banking policy. It wasn't about security. It was about who they thought she was. The teller's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then, as if coming to a decision, she slowly placed Danielle's ID on the counter instead of proceeding with the transaction. I'll be right back." Danielle's eyes narrowed as the teller grabbed the ID and walked away, disappearing through a door leading to the manager's office. She exhaled slowly, tapping her nails against the marble countertop. She had expected to be treated differently. She hadn't expected this, but something told her it was only the beginning. But Danielle wasn't leaving, not until she got answers. Danielle leaned against the counter, watching the teller disappear behind the frosted glass door. The tension in the lobby felt thicker now, like something unsaid was hanging in the air. She glanced around, taking in the subtle details. A man in business attire stood 2 spots behind her, waiting for his turn. His suit was slightly wrinkled, his tie loosened. He looked like he had come straight from work. When he stepped up a few minutes ago, the teller greeted him immediately. Another woman, older, wearing a floral dress, was chatting easily with a different teller across the lobby. No hesitations, no extra scrutiny. Danielle turned back to the counter, her jaw tightening. She had been standing there for nearly 5 minutes now, waiting for an explanation, waiting for something that shouldn't even be happening. But she knew what was going on. This wasn't just about policy. If it were, the teller would have explained what was wrong. She wouldn't have walked off without a word. This was different. The door finally swung open, and the teller reappeared, this time with someone else. A branch manager. Middle-aged, stocky build, bald, with rimless glasses. His name tag read Todd Larson. His expression was polite, but too controlled. He wasn't approaching with the ease of someone who just wanted to help. He was assessing. Danielle knew that look. She had seen it before, just never directed at her. Todd stopped at the counter, giving her a tight-lipped smile. "Afternoon, ma'am. I understand you're trying to make a withdrawal." Danielle nodded once. "That's right, $5,000. My account, my ID." Todd glanced at the teller, then back at Danielle. "Mind if I take a quick look at your identification?" "Mind." She exhaled slowly, keeping her voice steady. "Already gave it to her." Todd didn't even acknowledge the comment. He simply picked up the ID, holding it up to the light, studying it. And he looked back at her. "Miss Grayson, is this your first time banking with us?" Danielle's stomach dropped. The question was so carefully phrased, but the meaning was clear. "Do you belong here?" Her tone sharpened. "I've banked here since this branch opened." Todd gave a slow, exaggerated nod, like he was processing the information. "And you said you were withdrawing $5,000? Danielle felt her patience thinning. "That's what I wrote down." The lobby had gone quieter, not silent, but quieter. A few customers had glanced in her direction, probably noticing the shift in energy. Todd turned the ID over in his fingers. Then, without even looking at her, he asked, "And what do you do for work, Miss Grayson?" Danielle let out a short laugh, more out of disbelief than amusement. There it was, the moment where professionalism slipped just enough for the truth to show. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "I'm in finance," she said carefully. Todd's smile was forced. "Oh, what kind?" Danielle let the silence stretch. Then she said, "Banking." That made him pause just for a second. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. "I see," he said slowly. "And this is a personal account, correct? Not a business one?" Danielle folded her arms. "That's what it says on the form." Another slow nod. Another glance at the teller. More hesitation. Then, as if coming to some invisible decision, Todd placed the ID back on the counter. "Unfortunately, we won't be able to process this withdrawal at this time." Danielle blinked, processing the words. "What?" She straightened. "Excuse me." Todd gave a calm, measured expression. "We're unable to verify the transaction." Danielle felt her pulse kick up. "What do you mean? You have my ID. You have my account number. What's there to verify?" Todd clasped his hands together. "It's just a precaution. We take security very seriously." Security. There it was, the word people used when they didn't want to say what they really meant. Danielle's fingers curled against her palms. This wasn't about fraud. This wasn't about banking policies. This was about something else entirely. But she wasn't leaving. Not now, not without an answer. But Todd wasn't done yet. He had one more thing to say. And when he did, Danielle knew this was about to go from bad to worse. Danielle let the words sink in. "We're unable to verify the transaction." Her gaze flicked between Todd and the teller, waiting, giving them a chance to fix this. Maybe they'd realize their mistake, process the withdrawal, and let her walk out without another word. But neither of them moved. She exhaled slowly, pressing her palms against the counter. "Todd," she said, her voice calm but firm, "what exactly needs to be verified?" Todd kept his hands clasped in front of him, expression neutral, too neutral. "Well, Miss Grayson, large cash withdrawals require additional security steps. We just need to confirm a few details before proceeding." Danielle arched a brow. "Like what?" Todd hesitated for a split second before responding. "Just some basic account verification. Can you tell me the last deposit amount made to this account?" Danielle stared at him. That wasn't standard procedure. Sure, security questions were normal, but that wasn't one of them. Not for a withdrawal with a valid ID. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, the unspoken challenge. Was this a test? A way to make her prove she had access to her own money? Her fingers curled against the marble countertop. "I don't have that number memorized," she said evenly. But if you pull up my account like you would for anyone else, you can see all my deposits. Todd gave her a thin smile. Of course. But in the interest of security, we need to make sure the account holder can confirm certain details first. Danielle's jaw tightened. I just gave you my ID. Todd didn't flinch. I understand. But you'd be surprised how often fraudulent IDs come through. Fraudulent. She took a slow breath through her nose. I'm not withdrawing millions. It's $5,000, a fraction of what I have in this account. I've already followed protocol. So let me ask again, what's the real issue here? Todd's expression didn't change. We're just doing our due diligence, Miss Grayson. Her patience was wearing thin. Todd, she said, her voice measured, if I were a man in a tailored suit, would you be asking me these questions? The words landed. A flicker of something crossed his face. Too fast to catch, but it was there. A shift in posture, a subtle tightening around the eyes. Then, just as quickly, his mask of professionalism returned. This isn't about appearance, he said smoothly. It's about policy. Danielle let out a short, humorless laugh. Is that right? Todd tilted his head slightly, like he was considering his next words carefully. Would you like to try using a different form of verification? He offered. Perhaps a utility bill? A second form of ID? A utility bill. Danielle couldn't help it. She let out a disbelieving breath. You want me to provide a second form of ID from my own bank account, where you're currently holding my money? Todd didn't blink. Danielle shook her head, tapping her nails against the counter. Okay, let's do this another way. Pull up my account. Todd hesitated. You have my name, she continued. You have my ID. If you check my file, you'll see that I've been banking here since day one, that I helped open this branch, that I probably signed off on some of your training materials. Todd remained silent. Danielle leaned in slightly, lowering her voice just enough to make the point land. You might want to check before you dig this hole any deeper. Todd's lips pressed together. The teller, who had been watching quietly, shifted uncomfortably. For a brief moment, Danielle wondered if he'd finally cave, if he'd backtrack, apologize, and handle this the way it should have been handled from the beginning. Instead, he let out a short breath, as if reluctantly coming to a decision. I'm sorry, Miss Grayson, he said smoothly. Without additional verification, we can't process this withdrawal today. Danielle felt a rush of heat in her chest, not from embarrassment, from anger. She could feel the eyes of customers nearby, subtle glances that flicked toward the exchange, sensing the tension but pretending not to notice. She could hear the measured politeness in Todd's voice, the kind that let her know he wasn't concerned about security at all. He had already decided she wasn't supposed to be here, and nothing she said was going to change that. But Todd had just made a critical mistake, because if he had simply processed the transaction, this would have ended here. Now, Danielle was about to make him regret it. But before she could say another word, Todd did something that sent a fresh wave of disbelief through her, something that turned this from frustrating to downright infuriating. Danielle barely had time to react before Todd did the unthinkable. He reached beneath the counter, pressed a discreet button near the register, and called over security. A uniformed guard, broad shoulders, hand resting near his belt, stepped out from a back office. His expression was unreadable, but Danielle knew what this looked like. A bank manager refusing to process a customer's request was one thing. Calling over security was something else entirely. It was a statement. It was an escalation, and it made her stomach tighten. Danielle let out a slow breath, forcing herself to remain calm. She had dealt with men like Todd before, the ones who didn't expect pushback, the ones who made it their mission to remind certain people where they stood. But she wasn't playing into it. She lifted her chin slightly, locking eyes with Todd. You're really doing this? Todd gave a carefully neutral expression. We just want to ensure a smooth experience for all our customers. A smooth experience, as if she was the one making a scene. The security guard stepped closer, his voice measured. Is there a problem here? Danielle turned to him, keeping her posture relaxed. That depends, she said coolly. Are you here to help me access my money, or just to escort me out? The guard hesitated, glancing at Todd, who gave a tight nod. Danielle let out a small laugh, shaking her head. Wow, so this is what we're doing. Todd sighed like he was the one being inconvenienced. Miss Grayson, if you'd like to return with additional documentation, we'd be happy to assist you. But right now, we can't. Danielle cut him off. You know what's funny, Todd? I watched you process that man's transaction 10 minutes ago. No extra verification. No manager intervention. No security. Todd's expression stiffened. She stepped closer to the counter, voice lowering. I wonder what's different about me. The tension in the room shifted. The teller looked down, avoiding eye contact. The security guard shifted slightly on his feet, his stance less rigid now. Todd, however, stood firm. I'm sorry you feel that way, Miss Grayson, he said, voice flat. But our policies are in place for a reason. Danielle held his gaze for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached in her bag. Todd stiffened. The security guard's hand inched closer to his belt. Danielle didn't blink. She pulled out her phone and started recording, letting Todd feel the weight of his mistake. He had grabbed her ID as if he had the authority to decide what happened next, as if this was his bank. But it wasn't. It was hers. She tilted her phone slightly, making sure the camera captured his face, the security guard, the tension hanging in the air. Then, in the calmest voice possible, she said, Todd, let me introduce myself properly. His expression twitched, the first sign of real uncertainty. Danielle reached for her ID, plucking it from his grip with deliberate ease. She flipped it over in her hand, tapping her finger against the name printed on it. You see this? This isn't just any customer's ID. She paused, letting the words sink in. You're looking at the founder and CEO of Grayson Trust. The silence in the bank lobby was instant. The security guard's posture shifted. The teller's face drained of color. Even the customers lingering nearby, pretending not to eavesdrop, stiffened. Todd, for the first time since this whole interaction started, he lost control. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. His lips parted slightly, as if forming a sentence, but no words came out. Danielle took a slow step back, slipping her ID into her bag. I built this bank, she continued. From nothing. I signed the approval for this branch. I personally approved the hiring budget that got you this job. Todd's hands curled into fists. His entire demeanor had shifted. Gone was the forced politeness. What was left was pure panic. Danielle gave him a tight-lipped smile. And today, I walked in as just another customer, just to see what would happen. She tilted her head slightly. You know what happened, Todd? He didn't answer, couldn't. Danielle let her voice lower just a notch. I was refused service, lied to, humiliated, and treated like I didn't belong. Todd finally blinked, his mouth opening. Miss Grayson, Danielle held up a hand. No, you had your chance to speak. Now you listen. She turned slightly, making sure everyone in the lobby could hear her next words. If I was standing here in a tailored suit, if I were a man, if I looked like what you expect a CEO to look like, and I wouldn't be having this conversation. Todd's eyes darted to the security guard, as if looking for help. The guard said nothing. The teller, she was staring down at her register, looking like she wanted to disappear. Danielle took a slow breath, pulling her phone back up. Todd, I have a question for you, she said deadpan. Would you like me to send this footage directly to corporate, or should I just handle this right now? Todd visibly paled. His mouth opened and closed twice before he finally found his voice. Miss Grayson, I sincerely apologize. This was just a misunderstanding. Danielle arched a brow. A misunderstanding? He nodded quickly. Yes, absolutely. I can process that withdrawal right away. Danielle let that sit in the air for a second. Then, finally, she let out a soft laugh. Todd, she said, shaking her head, you and I both know it's too late for that. Todd's face was ashen, because he knew she was right. And what came next? That was up to her. But one thing was certain. His day was about to get a lot worse. Todd's face had lost every ounce of confidence. The smooth, polished manager who had so casually dismissed her 5 minutes ago now stood rigid, hands gripping the counter as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. The security guard who had been called over to handle her now shifted awkwardly, eyes darting between Todd and Danielle as if silently asking, Am I still supposed to be here? Danielle exhaled slowly. tapping her nails against the counter. "Let me make sure I understand, Todd," she said, her voice measured. "Just a few minutes ago, my ID wasn't enough. My name wasn't enough. My account history wasn't enough. You needed more proof. You needed additional verification. And now that you know who I am," she let the pause linger, watching him squirm. "Suddenly all of that doesn't matter anymore." Todd swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Miss Grayson, I sincerely regret how this situation unfolded. I can assure you this was not intentional." Danielle let out a humorless laugh. "Not intentional," she repeated. "Todd, do you think I'm stupid?" His eyes widened slightly, but he stayed silent. "You knew exactly what you were doing," she continued, voice calm but sharp. "You looked at me, and, in your mind, you already decided I wasn't supposed to be here. You put up every roadblock you could to make sure I knew it." Todd shook his head quickly. "Miss Grayson, I assure you, that's not what happened." Danielle held up a hand, cutting him off. "No," she said, her voice like steel. "I don't want to hear any more rehearsed apologies. Because let's be clear, you're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught." Todd's jaw tightened. The customers in the lobby were no longer pretending not to listen. The air felt charged, the weight of the moment sinking into everyone standing nearby. The teller who had started this whole mess stood frozen, staring at the register, refusing to look up. Danielle turned toward the security guard. "You were called over to escort me out, correct?" she asked. The guard hesitated, then gave a slow nod. "Yes, ma'am. That was my understanding." She nodded. "And now that you know who I am, are you still under that impression?" The guard glanced at Todd, then back at her. His stance shifted slightly. "No, ma'am. I was just following instructions." Danielle studied him for a moment. She knew how this worked. Todd would try to pass the blame on to everyone else, pretend this was just an overreaction, try to make this go away. But this wasn't going away. Danielle reached for her bag and pulled out a business card. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, sliding it across the counter toward Todd. "You're going to call my office. You're going to schedule a meeting with corporate, and you're going to explain in detail why this happened today." Todd's fingers trembled slightly as he picked up the card. "Of course, Miss Grayson. Absolutely." Danielle turned to the security guard. "I appreciate you stepping in when called," she said evenly. "But I'd advise you to be more careful about which situations actually require your involvement. If a customer isn't being disruptive, the first step shouldn't be intimidation." The guard gave a small nod. "Understood, ma'am." She turned to the teller, who was still pretending not to exist. "You," Danielle said, voice calm but firm. The young woman flinched. Danielle leaned slightly over the counter. "You saw my ID. You had my account information. And you still decided that I wasn't worth listening to." The teller finally looked up, eyes wide. I was just following protocol, ma'am." "Then maybe you need to ask yourself why protocol only seems to apply to people like me." The teller swallowed hard, looking away. Danielle took one last look around the branch. Every customer in the room was watching. Every employee had heard. This wasn't about a withdrawal anymore. This was about something bigger. Danielle straightened her shoulders. She had made her point, but she wasn't done. Because now, she was going to make sure this never happened again. Danielle stepped away from the counter, her heels clicking against the polished tile as she made her way toward the exit. The silence in the bank was thick, almost suffocating. No one moved. No one spoke. Todd stood frozen, her business card still clutched in his fingers. The teller looked as if she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. The security guard, who had been so ready to escort her out, now looked uncomfortable, unsure. And the customers, they had stopped pretending not to watch. Danielle paused at the door, then slowly turned back around. One last thing. She wasn't the type to let something like this slide. She had spent years building this bank. It was supposed to be a place where people felt safe, respected, valued. But today, she had been reminded that policies on paper mean nothing if the people enforcing them don't believe in them. She took a slow breath, scanning the room. Then, in a voice that was steady, clear, and impossible to ignore, she said, "This is the last time something like this happens in my bank." The weight of her words settled over the room. Todd flinched. The teller shifted in place. The security guard looked down. Danielle continued, I won't stand by while customers are treated differently because of assumptions, bias, or just plain ignorance. Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't have to. Everyone was listening. There will be changes. She said simply, real ones. Because if this can happen to me, the CEO, then I can only imagine what happens to the people who don't have the power to push back. The bank remained silent. Todd's throat bobbed as he swallowed. Miss Grayson, I assure you, don't assure me, she said coolly. Show me. His mouth snapped shut. Danielle glanced at her phone. The recording was still active. She stopped it, slipping the device back into her bag. Corporate will be in touch, she said. And Todd, he stiffened. You might want to start looking for a new job. She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked out the door. The fallout was immediate. By the next morning, Danielle had already scheduled an emergency meeting with her corporate leadership team. Every branch manager was called in. Every customer service policy was reviewed. And Todd? He was gone. But Danielle didn't stop there. She implemented mandatory bias training across all branches, introduced a new accountability system, encouraged customers to report any instances of discrimination, no matter how subtle. Within weeks, Grayson Trust saw a shift. Employees were more aware. Customers, especially those who had been ignored or brushed off in the past, began to notice the difference. And Danielle? She never forgot that day in the bank, because it was proof of something she had always known. Real change doesn't happen because of words on a page. It happens because someone refuses to accept the way things are. And today, that someone was her. If you've ever been in a situation like this, or know someone who has, don't stay silent. Speak up, call out, and most importantly, demand change. Because the only way things get better is when we refuse to accept anything less.